If you're interested in exploring these topics further, learning and connecting with like-minded individuals, check out the 3 Patreon discussion groups available. Just visit theinfinitesparkofbeing.com and click the participate button. I also offer a free meditation group online every Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to any of my social media profiles for the link found in my link tree. There's no pressure to be on camera or to actively participate in any of these groups. Just come and listen and enjoy. Join an online spiritual community of everyday people committed to understanding the human experience more deeply through spiritual practices that we can apply to our everyday lives. Join us. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and in this episode, we're going to talk about the year that was and the year that is to be. We're also going to be talking about what our part in it was and what our part in it will be. This is an obligatory New Year's episode. Now, this idea of what was your part in it is an old AA finger-wagging question that gets misused and misunderstood by nearly everyone. So if you're in that world, relax. I may actually give you a new way of perceiving that question. And if you're not in that little club, being asked what your part was in something that you didn't feel you had a part in or any control over can also sound a bit abrasive. So just bear with me and see where this might go. Now, I'm sure that some of you are in fact AA scholars that would never ever shame a sponsee inadvertently with such language. I mean, we all know that most sponsors are deeply enlightened spiritual beings that should absolutely be guiding addicts through the labyrinth of addiction. After all, it's a spiritual malady, and a good AA or NA adherent with anywhere from 6 months to 3 months sober is absolutely qualified to address this ailment and guide their sponsee through the 12 steps. I mean, fuck it, you're on the other side of the river. Why not start ferrying people across? You see that? I'm already digressing. Anyway, in this episode, we're going to examine what objectivity means and what subjectivity means. How can we better guide the mind to manifest a more beneficial experience of life, and what it means to start a new year. So this past season of The Americans was pretty crazy, and at times felt like a goddamn fever dream that induced a lot of laughter. But it was the kind of laughter that happens when you watch your drunk friend almost kill herself doing something unbelievably stupid and then lying about it, or at least conveniently forgetting that she was shit-faced the night before and tried to start a fight with a Mexican gangbanger in a 7-Eleven over who gets the last Colt 45. Or more appropriately, the kind of laughter that comes from watching a child look you in the eyes and lie right to your face about something you just watched them do. Now, something that we've talked a lot about on this podcast is what is it that we're trying to gain from a more spiritually focused life? What do we want from a dedicated spiritual practice? And the answer is largely that we would like a different experience of life, something more positive, something more loving, rewarding, enriching. And that's also what most people want when they decide to commit themselves to a New Year's resolution. We want to experience change. We're unhappy with our current circumstances, and we'd simply like things to change. Sure, we can list all of these things, but the reality is that we want change. It's a very profound thing to want, since we are perceiving and experiencing all of this with the human mind, which doesn't understand change, really. And that's exactly why the changes that we desire to make are so difficult. As much as we want a new experience, the mind will attempt to drag us back and put everything back where it was, which is totally normal. It's that old saying that the mind will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. So before we go any further, let's look at 2 words: objective and subjective. These are very important words to understand, mainly because our mind desires objectivity as it feels a bit safer, but is then forced to contend with the reality of subjectivity. So for something to be objective, it cannot involve personal preferences, opinions, or personal tastes. Now, when something is subjective, it involves personal preferences, opinions, and personal tastes. So you see the issue. And we are trained to desire that objectivity, grasp at that objectivity, and cling to the desire for objectivity, not only by the mind, but also by the power structure that lives in their egoic mind. These individuals grasp at objectivity because it gives a false sense of comfort to the shareholders. This is why they create policies that go nowhere. These policies act like morals in an effort to guarantee a desired outcome. Remember, wisdom frees you because it only knows how things are right now and does not attempt to predict the future. Morality or policies, on the other hand, bind you as they attempt to create false guardrails that don't really hold things in place. So when we look at these words, objectivity and subjectivity, we notice something. We notice how little objectivity there really is in the world. In fact, life is a subjective experience. Even if we both agree that something is tragic, the level to which it is a tragedy and the degree to which it affects us is very subjective. Now, I know that some of you will struggle with this, and why wouldn't you? But don't get confused by things like, most people say this, and since most people agree, it must be okay. Well, that's the problem with democracy, right? If everyone decides that thumbtacks are healthy and that they're a good source of iron, are you going to eat them? No, because that would be crazy. I mean, look at where we are right now. Essentially, 4 years ago, everyone said, let's eat thumbtacks, and if you don't, you're a murderer. Or if you don't eat these thumbtacks, you're not going to be allowed to provide for your family. Or actually worse, a bunch of unremarkable elected officials playing the role of pseudo-mommy and pseudo-daddy tell you to eat thumbtacks because the government regulatory bodies deemed it safe. And after all, if you can't trust the unelected members of these regulatory bodies, who can you trust? Oh, and by the way, the folks running those regulatory bodies all worked for thumbtack manufacturers. So it's a perfect system. What the fuck was the point I was trying to make? Oh yeah. Just because a bunch of unremarkable knuckleheads say something doesn't make it objectively true or objectively real. And as a side note, I say unremarkable because these individuals are not particularly talented or capable when it comes to the real world. The lifeblood of their existence is relevancy. And they can only remain relevant if we, the people, buy into their identity, or if they simply frighten us into compliance. Now, this lack of objectivity in the human birth can be very frightening for a lot of people, and I can see why. However, it's this lack of objective truth that gives you freedom, believe it or not. Because once you stop buying into their subjective reality, once you stop accepting their opinions, their preferences, and their personal taste, the world opens up. Possibilities begin to manifest. You are born free. However, your God-given freedoms and the things that you are entitled to as an organism on planet Earth are legislated away and then fed back to you piecemeal as some sort of reward. But that's part of this birth for us in the States. We took birth here where there's a system in place that we kind of just have to play this game within these guardrails. And once we understand the relativity of this incarnation and the subjectivity of the human experience, that's when we begin to understand these new age concepts like manifestation and the law of attraction, which is actually the law of karma, but the word karma got westernized for us, essentially, to represent some sort of punishment reward system when it is, in fact, the true law of attraction and manifestation. So back to this question of what was your part in it? So often in the world of recovery and the process of getting sober, a traumatic event from the past comes up while working through the 12 steps. And the sponsor will inevitably ask the sponsee, what was your part in it? Trauma responses, anxiety, ruminating thinking, grief and loss, stress, these are all reoccurring patterns in the mind. They're often the result of reacting the same way over and over again. Why do we do this? Because the mind believes the past is still here, happening now, causing the nervous system to respond accordingly. What the mind perceives, the body feels. Mind Transformation and Restructuring, MTR, offers a pathway to release these patterns. It guides both the mind and the nervous system out of these repetitive cycles and into a lighter, freer way of being. If this resonates with you, feel free to reach out via direct message or through the contact section at theinfinitesparkofbeing.com. You don't have to live the way you've been living. Change is possible. Well, this can be a very insensitive question. It implies that the sponsee may have done something to deserve what happened. But remember, the 12 steps were designed by a Christian male who happened to be a sex addict and an alcoholic. So let's say you cheated on your wife. Well, then, yeah, what was your part in it, Bill? But since AA is nothing if not traditional, this question gets asked of, for instance, a young woman who was raped in college. So what was this young woman's part in this event, in this traumatic event? Well, her part in this event was that of a victim. She didn't ask for it, as the question might imply. However, when I ask you what was your part in this year, it's not to accuse you of something. It's just to get you to think. Not all questions are meant to be answered. It's like a Zen koan. Just let it roll around in your head, see what comes up. What realizations emerge in your consciousness when you just look at the question? See what comes up naturally. Don't try to answer it. Don't start auditing yourself. Well, I could have done this and I could have done that. Just hang out with it. You might find that your part in it was that of the experiencer and nothing more, just as the victim of something. Whatever it is, just let the mind show you. You know, often it's said that we are human beings that are conscious creators, but I think I'd like to add that we are subconscious creators, as it's the subconscious mind's habituated perception of things that is responsible for manifesting our experience of material reality. So when we're deciding to alter our reality and quote unquote manifest something new, it's really the act of using the mind against the mind that creates or attracts the experiences we want. What we can do, or what we should do, is use the conscious mind, the thoughts we're aware of, to program the subconscious mind to perceive the world in a more skillful way that allows us to experience life in a more beneficial way. This understanding of that interplay between the conscious and the subconscious minds is the law that attracts, manifests, or reveals the world we'd like to experience. This understanding is the actual law of attraction. So really, only once we're able to understand the subjective nature of the world around us are we able to realize the freedom we have to manifest the experiences we'd like to have. Now, let's do a bit of a refresher. The mind has 6 cognitive faculties. They are judgment, perception, consciousness, language, memory, and thinking. Our judgment is not objective. It's subjective, right? Our perception, the way we regard, understand, and interpret things, is not objective. It's subjective. What we are and are not conscious of is not objective or universal. The words that I would use to describe an event are not the words that you'd use to describe an event. And even if they were, they wouldn't be universal, making them subjective. Memory is not objective. We all remember things differently. And even if it's close, it's not exactly the same. And again, it's not universal. Certain things are going to be highlighted in my mind, whereas they may not be highlighted in your mind. And as for thinking, we don't all think the same. And even if we do think the same way about some things, it won't be the same for all things. Again, it won't be universal. It will be based on our preferences, our opinions, and our personal tastes. So when we're told that this experience, this world is the mind, that's what's meant by that. And not only is it the mind, but we also see the subjectivity of it. The mind, the thoughts that are the result of the mind's training are the subjective experiences witnessed by us as an awareness in the universe. Now, if you're the kind of person that needs a solid reality with heavy guardrails, then that's quite alarming and might even be so alarming that it gets dismissed by your mind as it doesn't fit with your current understanding of reality. And I fully understand that. But if we're going to use language, that's what those words mean, objective and subjective. This is why many people use the term consensus reality, meaning that reality may not be objective, but it's certainly the consensus point of view. Now, whether or not that's an acceptable thing is up to you. So what we begin to realize is that our experiences are the result of the mind and a result of the repeated responses to those experiences. We experience fear due to a perception in the mind. We then act as if the perception is objectively real and true, therefore reinforcing that perception and guaranteeing that we will continue to have that experience again. So let's revisit the question. What was your part in the year that was? What did you reinforce with your reactions and behavior? What did you act as if were true? What did you work to change? Did you reinforce the perception of a threat? Or did you sit in stillness, allowing the sensation to wash over you, thus training the mind to release that particular fear? And what will be your part in the year to come? What will be your role in the drama of your life? The divine play of this relative concept that you believe is you. Now, too often we blame the world for our lack of discipline and perseverance. And I get it. I live in the world as well. I know how difficult and complex things can be, but at some point, I had to look around and see that there were people that started with less than me, started in a worse spot than me, and still managed to carve out an experience for themselves that was much more optimal than the one I'd carved out for myself. I had to ask, what was my excuse? Well, what I found was that I was the common denominator in my life. I did it or didn't do it. You don't have to continue to have the same shitty state-sanctioned experience that they keep prescribing you through their media campaigns of fear and worry. But you have to remember this. You were the only one in the room when you decided to give up. It was you and your character that decided to walk when your lungs burned and your heart pounded. It wasn't God. It wasn't your parents, your bully, or the government. It was you. You decided to walk up the hill rather than run. You stopped at the hard part and decided that was enough. So if you act as if you can't, then you won't. It's very simple. And this isn't about the hustle or the acquisition of goods and services. This is about the simple contentment of a life filled with love